Hello again, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us. So I'm really excited about this session. We are talking about how we can keep our promises to future generations, and I think that's something we all definitely want to hear a lot about. So just to start off, to give us a framework, what do you each see as some of the biggest challenges that are facing our young people today?
I'll take a crack at that. So it's great to be here, and I just want to acknowledge Low Income Investment Fund and City Foundation. We're very proud partners in Progress grantee and happy to be designated as a quarterback agency in LA. So the biggest challenges in Los Angeles, which is where we do all our work, are around poverty and around education. I mean, I think it's similar in urban areas all across the country. In the case of LA, we've taken a purposeful place-based approach to our work. We're lucky in Los Angeles to have all 4 of the White House neighborhood revitalization initiatives in place. So that's Promise Neighborhoods, the Promise Zone, Choice Neighborhoods, and the Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation Grant. So we've got an opportunity to sort of show on a national scale how all these different resources and funding streams can be blended for maximum impact, but with the goal of transforming schools, transforming communities, and in the end, fighting poverty. I think there is a modern-day war on poverty going on. I think the Obama administration has done a phenomenal job of getting federal agencies to align and break down silos to support this kind of place-based work like we're doing in LA. And hopefully we can show that it's possible to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty through this strategy.
Awesome. Well, let me say, I think there are 2 different challenges. I'll talk in a second about the challenges that we think about face young people, but I think there's a framing challenge, which is how we think about what's at the center of a response. And to bring those 2 ideas together, at America's Promise, we really want to take a youth-centered, not a system-centered, not a solution-centered approach, but a youth-centered approach. So we've spent a lot of time talking with and especially listening to young people to understand what their perspective is on what's going on. And you know, from the stories we heard in our research last year, it gives a little flavor of what's going on in these young people's lives. You know, a kid in the Northeast who homeless, as somebody discussed earlier, couch surfing, sitting in school wondering where he's going to stay that night and how he's going to wash and how he's going to eat. But he finishes his little testimonial by saying, you know, and I felt like a bum. And a young woman in Tennessee who was abused by her father and now being abused by her boyfriend and the father of her kid. And a kid in Minnesota who was actually really on the right track until his brother was shot in a drive-by shooting. And his life just took a radical turn in that moment. So when we think about what it is that young people need to succeed, we subscribe to the view that education is crucial, but for many of the young people about whom we're most concerned and in the communities that we most think about, we have to think about how it's going to be possible for those young people to access, pay attention to, concentrate, attend, connect with a higher quality education. And so for us, that comes down to what we call the 5 promises to young people, which is that every young person needs caring adults in their lives, people who nurture them and challenge them and hold them accountable and support them. Every young person needs a sense of safety, physical safety and emotional safety, at home, in school, in the community, online. Without that kind of safety, kids are on alert and in a sense on lockdown. Kids need good health. We know what goes on in poorer communities with respect to access to health, whether it's dental or asthma. So without good health, kids again start missing school and so forth. Absolutely, the 4th promise is an effective education. And the 5th is that we need to include young people in solutions. So opportunity to serve is the 5th promise for America's Promise. So we want to take a look at this from what it looks like from a kid's perspective, and remember how we try to bring up our own kids and how they grow up in sort of a constellation of support, a network of people and institutions that are all designed to sort of keep them on track. And that doesn't exist for many young people who are growing up in more challenging circumstances. We can't think about, and other people have talked about this, just one solution. It's much more complex than that. Kids need that kind of constellation of support, and we got to figure out how to provide that.
Right. So I think one of the things that people think about and talk about a lot when they're trying to kind of measure the progress of disadvantaged youth is high school graduation rate. And you have talked before about how dropping out of high school, while problematic, is kind of a symptom of these larger issues, some of which you just mentioned. And it seems like that might be a pretty tall order to address a lot of the other things that are going on in a kid's life that would cause them to then drop out of school. So I'm wondering if you could give us some examples of ways that you think that can be addressed. And then, Dixon, I want to know if you feel similarly.
So we just did this big report last year that called Don't Call Them Dropouts, in which we talked to hundreds of kids who had left school before graduating. We try to actually drive around the term dropout because for a lot of those kids, it was a really careful, conscious choice. In retrospect, many of them thought not the right choice, but it seemed like the right choice. To many of these young people, they felt like they were taking charge of their lives and dealing with things that were very immediate. One of the things that was most affirming about this research was, and there were things that were depressing about it, but one of the things that was most affirming about this research is it talking to hundreds of kids who had dropped out of high school and who most people in society would think of as kids who were quitters or losers. Those kids retained very fundamental middle-class aspirations. They wanted more education, a good job, a stable place to live, and a healthy family. It's like, okay, that's great. That's what everybody wants, and that's what everybody would hope that those guys would want as well. So, but that reframing who those kids are and what their aspirations is very helpful, I think, because it's easy to be against and to blame if you decide people are quitters and losers. You know, Americans don't love quitters and losers. But if you think of kids growing up in those circumstances as survivors and strivers, then everybody wants to be on the side of somebody who's striving to make something better. So I think that fundamental reframe really helps us think about high school graduation, about getting on kids' side. So I'll just tell you, we're going to release a report on Tuesday with the newest statistics on high school graduation, which have again this year reached historic highs. So we're at 81.4% high school graduation rate, which nationally, which sort of shockingly is the highest in history. It's on a path up. Our goal is to reach 90% on-time high school graduation by 2020, and we are on track to that goal right now. And that is the result of a lot of communities coming together to essentially work the problem. They see the problem, the data tells them that this is big. The Department of Education and their states hold folks accountable now, and that has triggered action by public officials, but also by communities to come together around this goal. And I think that's why we're seeing progress.
No, I agree completely, and high school graduation rate is at the core of what we're doing through the Promise Neighborhood and Promise Zone work. So a couple different angles on it. One is that we've seen over the last 2 years in our Promise Neighborhood high schools a 63% jump in the rate of kids graduating, not just graduating high school, but graduating college ready, which is sort of another layer in looking at how kids are graduating high school. So that's both graduating and meeting, in California's case, the A through G requirements to get into the Cal State or UC systems. So we're really excited about that progress at a time when the district and state have been basically stagnant. We're also just launching, and we have a fantastic mayor in LA, Eric Garcetti, who just announced this in his State of the City speech. We're launching an effort to take 5,300 6th and 7th graders, so that's as many 6th and 7th graders as in the entire city of Boston, and we're going to follow that cohort for the next 7 years through their first year of college. And so this is going to be a really exciting opportunity to provide all the wraparound supports that you would traditionally find in middle class, upper middle class communities to this group of 5,300 kids to get them through high school graduation and then into college. And then on the dropout piece, We've got a crisis in LA and in the country around disconnected youth. So youth who've dropped out, don't have employment, ages 16 to 24. So we're doing a lot of work at our agency and in Los Angeles around bringing those youth back into the educational system, into vocational training, GED, career pathways. And it's the toughest population to work with, the kids who have the least prospects in life, but absolutely critical for our economy, critical for our educational system. And so it's coming at it from both those angles.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing further. One of the things that we found in our research and other people have found in their research is for young people, moments of transition are especially difficult. The transition from primary school into middle school, especially the transition from middle school into high school. So our colleagues at the University of Chicago took a look at what was going on. This was a few years ago, why so many kids were dropping out and when they were dropping out. And when they did the analysis, they discovered that the vast number of dropouts were happening in the 9th grade. So, okay, then they went and looked at what was happening in the 9th grade. And as it turned out, the attitude was sort of, well, now you're in high school, you're grown up, and you know, it's up to you to succeed, which I don't think we took that attitude with our kids, and I suspect that people here who have kids didn't take that attitude with their kids. But that was sort of the school's attitude, and the kids, you know, they pick up a lot of data, they sort what's happening. They see, this seems sort of optional, and there's not a lot of structure here, so you go, you don't go, you do the work, you don't do the work. And so the intervention that the University of Chicago came up with and has been implemented throughout Chicago, the South Side now, is we're going to actually really track and support these kids in the 9th grade because that's where everybody bombs out. And Chicago has had just the kind of numbers that you talked about, just a dramatic increase over 7 years, like a 25% increase in high school graduation rates, just because they figured out 9th grade is the problem. And 9th grade is the problem because nobody's actually paying attention to these young people. And it's all those services. It's caring adults. It's creating safety for those kids, and we know that's a challenge in that community. It's attending to their health needs and making sure that they're staying up with their education.
Right. So there's a ton of focus on K through 12 education, as there should be. My question is, looking at the transition point that happens after that, this is a question that I get a lot when I'm reporting on education issues, and that is with rising student loan debt, with the rising cost of college, is college for everyone? Is that the ultimate goal? And if it isn't, what are the types of programs and what initiatives are happening on the front to create viable options for kids who maybe aren't going to college but still obviously need to be engaged in the labor force?
So, you know, I don't think that any of these educational goals are the ultimate goal. It's not the ultimate goal that kids should graduate from high school. It's not the ultimate goal that kids should go to college. The ultimate goal is that young people should grow up towards adult success that involves being employed and being a contributing member of society. College is a good way to do that. College helps people do that, but lots of people also do that without going to college. But I don't think that any of the educational attainment, access or attainment goals are really the goal. The goal is that young people move through young adulthood into adult success. And I think it's just helpful for all of us who think about, you know, everything from 3rd grade reading to 9th grade transition to high school success to college access to college completion. All those are good things, but you're going to live a long time after you finish college, hopefully. And really what you need is you need a job and you need to be a contributing member of the community. So then if we back up from that, what do you need to do that? Lots of people, increasing numbers of people, obviously need some kind of post-secondary. I don't know if it's helpful to call it college or not helpful to call it college, but need more than a high school degree. And for others, it may be high school plus some kind of a career and technical situation. I don't know. What do you think and what do you see?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, our strategy in LA, and I think for a lot of the promised neighborhoods, is cradle to college and career. So this is about that whole pipeline, whether college is necessary or not, but getting youth through that pipeline. And so in California, and in particularly in our promised neighborhood, we're focused on an initiative called Linked Learning, which is basically bringing career pathways into the high school. So transforming the high school experience so that kids are part of a career pathway that's a STEM career pathway or a health career pathway, so that the high school begins to have a reason to attend, a reason to stay in school. And so our schools that have implemented linked learning are the ones showing the highest increases in graduation rate, in college readiness, in completion, in success on the high school exit exam. So I think that's, and so those kids may or may not go into those careers. That's actually not all that important to us, whether they end up with a health job or not. But that they graduate high school, they develop the soft skills for employment, and then they can go to college or they can follow the career track. They can go to community college, they can go to vocational school. But the other piece of that is you have to have the employer involvement. These can't be career pathways which lead to nothing. And so it's critical that employers are at the table, that employers are willing to be at the table and say, these are the skills we need to see for kids coming out. Because it's easy to complain about our educational system and say it's not producing the right kids for our jobs. So employers need to get engaged so that we can make these career pathways work.
You know, one further note on that to what Dixon said, for a lot of the kids who we're most concerned about, the kids who are not succeeding in school, not staying in school, the whole notion of a job, you know, like I just visited a program where a kid, an apprenticeship program, kids said literally first time in an elevator, first time in an office, no concept. You know, my kids were in my office when they were 6 months old, right? You grew up, okay, you grow up, you have a job, you have an office or something, you have colleagues. A lot of kids don't actually know this, and so the salience of school, if you don't know what a destination is, the salience of school becomes less and less, and the attraction of other more ready outlets becomes more and more. So I completely agree, and I think about that we ought to be paying more attention to giving people exposure. I mean, we think about career day, which seems now, you know, when you think about it, seems kind of lame, a bunch of guys come around telling you what they do in some way that's really hard to connect with. I think taking kids into the workplace, seeing people who look like them, who will talk to them, and suggest, you know, there's a possibility you could do something like this. Opens possibilities and more likely to keep kids on track.
And summer jobs and internships,
right.
And yeah.
Absolutely.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit. In the past week or so, you know, we're not that far from Baltimore at all, and I think what we've seen in Baltimore has been an instance of a lot of young people who are from communities that are deeply impoverished, where unemployment rates are high, where there's a ton of disenfranchisement, meeting with some larger issues of, you know, feeling left out of society, of feeling, you know, like police are, you know, after them, and lots of other issues. So my question is, what is the thing that we learn about how to deal with youth before something hits a boiling point like this, and what is the lesson that we learn from Baltimore about taking care of our youth?
Well, I think it's just a lot of hard work. I mean, you've got to target a community, you've got to bring in resources, you've got to engage the community in the supports and programming. You have to get the community to believe that this is a valuable resource, that this is going to change lives, change schools, change neighborhoods. And that just takes time. And as mentioned before, there's no silver bullet to doing this. You've got to do everything. And you have to do it well, and you have to do it around outcomes, and you got to track those outcomes over time. And so that's why I'm a big believer in the place-based approach. I'm a big believer in what the Obama administration has tried to do. And I know they went to Baltimore yesterday to talk about sort of a web of services that can support in a city like that. But I think if you're targeting a community and you spend 5-10 years on a cradle to college and career approach, and you're in the schools and you're in the centers and you're touching families in multiple ways and you're able to show success over time, I think that's what gets folks believing that there's a future, that there can be optimism. And if you don't have that, then you just have despair. And I think that's what we've seen.
Yeah, I don't have so much to add to that. I think that the tragedy that happened in Baltimore and in other communities is a reminder to some folks who are not so close to this, who aren't like the people who are here today, who think about these issues all the time. And it's a hard reminder. If it sparks us to action, to paying attention to what the circumstances of people's lives are in communities like that, and something good comes of it, that's great. But wow, man, something good better come of it, because a lot of bad has already come to a lot of families around this.
I want to talk a little bit about the struggle of parental engagement when it comes to pushing youth to, not necessarily achieve the next thing, but kind of strike out into adulthood, in a positive way, and what happens when you don't have that option. So
I don't think, we think a lot about caring adults, and one starts with parents as caring adults. And so never want to in any way diminish the importance of parents in young people's lives and the challenges they face if they don't have parents who are, for whatever reason, able to provide the kind of support, guidance, challenge that young people need. It's also worth remembering that parents in middle class and upper middle class communities, they don't do everything either. Like, they engage all kinds of people to help their kids, soccer coaches and instructors and music lessons and camp counselors, all that kind of stuff. So it's not like the parents in upper middle class communities are superheroes and they do everything for their kids. That's not what happens. So there are other resources, but you need people to help you navigate your way through life. And if young people are growing up in a circumstance where they don't have parents who are in the position to do that for them, then we have to find the ways to support the parents at being more effective in their parenting, if that's possible. But we have to find the ways to help those kids navigate their way forward and feel the kind of support that young people need to feel in order to explore the world, to connect with others, to trust, and to learn.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and fresh in my mind, we just held 2 family expos on consecutive Saturdays in Hollywood and Pacoima, which are 2 parts of the Promised Neighborhood. And to see hundreds of families come out and parents with their kids doing workshops together, building robots together, learning about college savings accounts together, that's what you have to do. That's the level of engagement that's required. We have, in Hollywood, we now have a family source center, which is basically a one-stop shop for families. So a family comes in the door, it's our job to provide whatever resource that family needs for the kids, for the parents, for the siblings. And so it's about sort of bringing all those pieces to bear, looking at this in a holistic way, making sure families aren't encountering silos when they're trying to access benefits or resources, streamlining that process. But yeah, parental engagement is critical.
When we talk about the vast web of things that need to happen to help the next generation, where should communities be investing, in your opinions?
You're in the community investing.
You turn that one.
That's your game.
I don't want to just say it again, but I think it's this notion that. So I'll use a specific example. So in the last 2 years, not to throw dollar amounts out, but in the last 2 years, the federal government has put $100 million in new programmatic dollars into our Promise Zone, and I think that's a smart strategy, and I think that's a way to be approaching this issue because you need the resources. And so that's not capital dollars, that's not loan dollars. That's programmatic funding in a targeted geography. And I think that approach takes time. You don't get from cradle to career in 2 years, right? By definition, it's going to take 10, 15 years before we see the big results. But you've got to have those investments, and you got to do it in a smart way. There are 19 federal agencies now that are part of the Promise Zone initiative. So 19 agencies trying to figure out how to blend funding streams and have common outcomes across different federal programs. That's the first time that's happened. And so I think we have to keep that going. And we've got to make sure the investment stays.
The only thing I would add is that in addition to investing in young people in various ways as described, communities need to come together around this. There have been a lot of folks from the outside who have tried to do a lot of things, as said earlier, all well-meaning, all thought they were really smart when they were doing it. The only thing that'll stick over time is if there's genuine community engagement and genuine community buy-in. So you need to make the investment in the community coming together around goals with metrics and so forth. Otherwise, it'll be a drive-by kind of intervention.
And I think we're going to move to questions now, so over there.
I'm very glad that you mentioned summer youth employment as one of the many opportunities. We have really good summer youth employment programs. However, the placements tend to be in the nonprofit and the government sector. Do you have some strategies to incentivize businesses, whether small, medium, or large, to increase their capacity and to place summer youth, in their programs? Because that's really what these young people need. They need exposure to business and to those models, as well as nonprofit and government models. So I'd love you to share any thoughts and success stories you may have.
Well, that's certainly a common issue. Strategies beyond guilting the business sector into, right? Is that what you're looking for? So I think what's worked for us is that summer jobs need to be part of a larger strategy. So when we're doing linked learning career pathways in high schools and we have employers partnering with the school on a particular career pathway, it makes it far more likely that employer is going to take 10 kids in the summer because they're now invested. They now have buy-in in these kids and believe in the potential that this is not just a wasted internship. This is actually a kid who may end up taking a job in my company. So I think the more that it can be part of something larger, the more compelling it is, but it's still really hard. I mean, it's still, it's a tough nut.
I agree with that, and I would also say that I think the extent to which we can think about summer employment as a platform for other things to happen that young people who are growing up in challenging circumstances really need to happen, whether that is finding a mentoring relationship in that or a role model in that setting, whether it's setting up a bank account for the first time and knowing a little bit about financial literacy. Those are big opportunities when you've got people in a spot where something like that is happening. I think just a little more intentionality around those things would produce really big outcomes.
And we have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Hi, I'm Jasmini Prasad. I'm an independent consultant. I thought everyone here did a really great job of talking about the problem as a multifaceted set of problems and the solutions being necessarily a multifaceted set of solutions that work cohesively. And I thought there's a really good job of kind of resisting this need for a silver bullet answer. How do we translate that kind of dialogue and this kind of way of thinking and understanding these issues to the media and the average taxpayer, so that, I mean, we've had a lot of really stupid questions during the Baltimore coverage, and a lot of kind of seeking, well, what is the one silver bullet? What is the one program? Or sometimes taxpayers can get disenchanted with spending money on programs that are siloed, not understanding that this is just really dealing with one facet of a very larger problem. What are you guys doing? What do you see as a way to translate that so that there's a wider understanding that this money really needs to be spent in a coordinated way?
Please.
Okay, I'll do that one. It's a big issue. I mean, you're onto a big challenge, but let me just tell you how I try to deal with this. To the extent that there's an enormous chasm and difference between young people who are growing up in some other neighborhood and with a whole bunch of challenging circumstances and our own kids, it's just not very easy to empathize with those kids and to try to recognize what their lives are like. And so people go to blaming the kids or blaming their parents or blaming their schools or blaming somebody, but not taking any responsibility themselves. So my effort is to try to help people understand that those kids are actually very similar to our own kids, and spending on them and what it takes for them to succeed is really very similar. There's no silver bullet with our own kids. And you try everything. I know we want, when we're spending taxpayer dollars, we want it to be evidence-based and everything's going to work. I will just tell you, I have 2 great kids. They've succeeded. That's marvelous. I have no idea why, right? Was it music lessons, or was it soccer, or was it gymnastics, or was it camp, or was it their schools? They went to D.C. public schools, which were kind of, you know, so when we talk about other people's kids, we think, oh, we just got to come up with a thing and invest in the thing, and it's going to solve everything. It's nonsense. It's not how our kids' lives are. It's not how our lives are. There are no single solutions, and you, as Dixon said, you basically, you do everything. And if you do everything, part of doing everything is, there are all those individual solutions, but part of doing everything is putting a value on people's lives and conveying to them and to others around them that they matter, that nobody's quitting on them. And if people feel that, then they'll rise to the occasion too.
And I'll just throw out one optimistic note on your question, speaking to sort of the larger population. We're working on a childhood poverty ballot measure for 2016 in California. And the polling, for the first time ever in California, the polling showing that income inequality is polling higher as an issue than education or public safety. So folks are getting it. People are tuned into this as a major problem. And now it's, what do we do if voters are engaged around this? How do we maximize that opportunity?
I think that optimistic note is a great place to end. Thank you guys all.
Thank you.